Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another live edition of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou, coming to you at the unusual time of a sort of Thursday evening as we build up to a weekend that Arsenal will be sitting out, a weekend in which Arsenal are not in action. I think that's a good thing at the minute. I got to be honest with you. Like, I'm feeling really not downbeat because I don't think I ever really want football to make me feel like that anymore. Like it does, obviously, but I try where possible to kind of avoid it. So, like today, got up this morning, recorded a podcast for you guys, recorded Inside Gooners over on Talksport, which will be out very, very soon, probably be out by the time some of you are watching or listening to this. And then I've tried to disconnect for the rest of the day. I've tried to disconnect from football, from the Arsenal. I've tried to put my feet up. I've tried to relax. But of course, every time I go to do that, David Ornstein drops a bombshell. and that means that we've got to get back behind the microphone and we've got to have a chat. And tonight's chat is going to be about the sporting director situation at Arsenal because David Ornstein has revealed that Arsenal plan to appoint their new sporting director next month. Obviously, we're at the end of February, so it could be any time during March. At least that's the plan. At least that's what Arsenal want to do. Now, these things don't always go as planned, so you've got to be mindful of that. And, you've got to be aware that, things might not get wrapped up in the sort of time frame that you sort of devise in your own mind. I mean, to say next month, it could be in 2 days' time, or it could be in like 30 days' time, right? There's an entire month in front of us, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is, this is what Arsenal hope to do. This is kind of what Arsenal expect to do, but it doesn't mean it's going to go that smoothly. What I will say is it needs to happen, and it needs to happen soon. It needs to happen with good time ahead of the summer, because whoever it is that takes on this job as the sporting director at Arsenal, they're going to come under a lot of scrutiny. They're going to come under a lot of pressure because of what's gone on before them. If it's Jason Ayto, he's going to be under even more pressure, I would argue, than any of the other names on David Ornstein's list, because there is a feeling among the fans that he is part of the reason that Arsenal didn't do the business that we all were adamant they needed to do in January. They haven't done, and we've since paid the price for it. They took a gamble. They took a risk. They decided to go one way. The fans felt that the sort of right thing to do was go the other way. And it's caused, as was mentioned to me earlier on today by the brilliant Clive Palmer, it's caused the divide. It's caused the split in the road. And so if any of the other names come in, and I'll run through them in a minute, they get a fresh slate. They get to go from zero. They get to start again. They get to come in and be the white knight. They get to come in and be seen to, if they get things right, save the day. Whereas for Jason Ayto, he's already kind of on the back foot. And that's one of a number of reasons why, if it were me in charge, I wouldn't appoint him. Now, really, really difficult to know from my position as a mere mortal, who exactly it was that maybe put the brakes on in the January window, whether it really was a collective decision, whether it was something that came from sort of the acting sporting directors level, whether it was something that came from above that, how much of an impact Mikel Arteta had on that. I'm adamant, by the way, that Mikel Arteta wanted a signing. Adamant, because he kept saying it. I don't think you do that publicly if you're not really sort of wedded to that stance. But the point I'm trying to make here is that Jason Ayto, if he gets this job, and he could, because, we were reading reports not that long ago, in fact, a few days ago, to the effect of the club are really happy with what he's shown so far, having stepped up in the interim to sort of cover Eddie's role. So he's a strong candidate. I just feel like because of what's gone on, because of the public opinion right now, he'd be on the back foot from the beginning. And so unless you are going to have a mega summer that in some way vindicates the decisions that we took both last summer and in January, he's going to be under some pressure. And I don't know if I want a sporting director to take on what's already a really sort of high pressured role where there's a lot of responsibility. I don't know if I'd want someone to take that on under those circumstances. I also think of the candidates that we're about to discuss, he's probably the least experienced, been with the club for about a decade now, came up as a scout, rose through the ranks to become kind of Edu's right-hand man, and has had a kind of apprenticeship under Edu, which has put him in this position where the club are now sort of leaning on him as the interim sporting director. So, yeah, he'd be doing it from a really difficult starting position. And when I think about that and I think about how difficult the job is anyway, I'm not sure that's necessarily what I want to see during the next month when we hopefully learn who this appointment's going to be. Guna73 in the chat says, we should have had a sporting director in place before the January transfer window. Wouldn't surprise me if we appoint one on the day the summer transfer window starts instead of well in advance. It has to be done in advance. Where I will sort of defend the club a little bit here, and I've been pretty scathing of what I thought was a real disappointment during January of the situation that we find ourselves in, which I do think, whilst not totally avoidable because there is an element of bad luck in there, it's certainly a situation that could have been a lot easier. It's certainly a situation that never really had to get this bad, only we let it because of the decisions that we took. But what I will say is this: you can't rush an appointment like that. You can't do an appointment like that overnight. You can't pick your sporting director who's going to be essentially responsible for driving your overarching football philosophy and strategy at your football club. You can't just appoint any old person. And a lot of the candidates that we're talking about are in jobs in some cases, have just left jobs, could be on gardening leave, could be in a period of time where, maybe they've just left the job not too long ago and want to spend some time with their families, etc., etc. It's right to get the right person. This is more important than making a signing in a lot of ways. We were talking about going and getting a short-term player, a sort of short-term addition to the squad that could come in and assist us in an area in which we're really, really short. So let's use Alvaro Morata as the example, because we heard that there were talks, or at least Arsenal putting out the feelers around him, right? You bring Alvaro Morata in for 6 months and it doesn't work, you just send him back. Low risk, no real commitment, and you move on from it. It's a lot easier to do that. It's a lot easier to do that with a player than it is to do it with a sporting director. You can't do it with a sporting director. You bring someone in, you bring them in on a massive salary, and to cut them loose is going to cost you a pretty penny. Just ask Manchester United. So I don't think this is something that could have happened just like that. I wonder how long it was known that Edu was seeking employment elsewhere. I wonder how long ago it was that maybe that relationship between Edu and the club reached a point of no further progress, if you like. And so have we had time to put our ducks in order in advance? The truth is, guys, we don't know, because we only knew Edu was leaving when we heard Edu was leaving. We only knew that was the case when it was, of course, publicly announced. So I'm not going to sit here and say you should have done it yesterday, or you should have done it a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago. Ideally, we would have done it nice and early. Ideally, we would have done it nice and quickly. But that is not always possible. So I'm going to sort of hold fire on the criticism with regards to the timing. Big hello to Junior. We've got AJ with us as well. O'Malley says he likes Andrea Berta. We'll talk about him a little bit later on. Olabe has been mentioned as well. AJ's a fan. Nikki says, I feel like the signs point to Olabe, especially with him leaving Real Sociedad at the end of the season. But having watched them a decent amount, the recruitment led by Olabe wouldn't make me confident. Interesting. We've got Wandering Minstrel in the chat who says, was Edu at the match yesterday, Harry? I have no idea. I don't think so. I think a big deal would have been made of that if he was. Arsenal Forever says, big up everyone. Jason Ayto, Richard Garlick and Tim Lewis need to be sacked. Get Dan Ashworth and Berta in. Interesting. Boston says, no amateurs. We need experience. Cass says, I can't see Ayto getting the post. Can he? I hope not. Although what he will have over the others is he will already know what is required in the summer, since he's already working there. This is the thing, though, Cass. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out what's needed in the summer. I think you could do that from an external position. I think you can look at it from the outside in and you can say, right, those are the clear needs. Will you understand the nuance, the exact profile, and have enough of an understanding of maybe what exactly Mikel Arteta wants to be able to make a fully informed decision when trying to identify a player? Probably not. But I think base level, it's quite clear what Arsenal need. So I don't really see that as a major issue, to be honest. Look, let's go through the names then that David Ornstein has mentioned. So he's mentioned Jason Ayto as one of the potential candidates, as I mentioned. Been at the club for about a decade now. He has mentioned Dan Ashworth, one of the most experienced candidates in the country, you would argue. Joined Newcastle United, was behind some really good signings, Alexander Isak, Anthony Gordon, two of those that have obviously worked out really, really well for them. There was a massive fight between Manchester United and Newcastle United over Dan Ashworth. Ineos came in and they thought that Dan Ashworth would be the guy to lead their project. So they went tooth and nail to get him. Eventually they did. There was a compensation package agreed. But how long was it into his Manchester United tenure? Let me just have a look here. Having expanded, he lasted 5 months in Manchester. That's it. 5 months. And one of the reasons for the rapid deterioration in relations was said to be his strategy in identifying a successor to Erik ten Hag. So he clearly wanted to go down a different route when it comes to how Manchester United were going to replace Erik ten Hag. And it sounds like that's where the relationship broke down. But look, Dan Ashworth's got a good reputation. The Manchester United thing, when you look at how they are operating generally as a football club, it's difficult to look at someone like Dan Ashworth, who's got such a really strong record in the past, and say, well, yeah, we'll just we'll disregard him because it went bad for a few months at Man United. When you look at what a basket case of a football club that is right now, it's completely fair to assume, I think, that Dan Ashworth couldn't work in that environment and was never going to thrive in that environment, as I'm sure many others will end up feeling the same. Andrea Berta is another one who's been mentioned, the Italian former Atletico Madrid sporting director. He left the Spanish capital last month after 12 years at the club. Is a long time. He was appointed technical director in 2013 before ascending to sporting director in 2017. Supported Diego Simeone in sustaining a team that regularly challenges Barcelona and Real Madrid for the title, winning 2 La Liga titles, the Europa League, and finishing runners-up in the Champions League twice. I always bang on about the Atletico Madrid project because it's one of the ones in Europe that has really gripped me over the years. When I was growing up, Atletico Madrid always had a decent player here or there. But under Diego Simeone, and obviously with the support of the people behind the scenes, one of whom was Andrea Berta, they've just gone on to incredible levels, and they're one of the most respected, and well thought of clubs, I would say, in European football now. So he's got the track record. 53-year-old, built his reputation in Italy, had jobs at AC Carpendolo before holding sporting director roles with Parma and Genoa. He's obviously used to dealing with sort of major transfers. He's bought the likes of Antoine Griezmann, Rodri. He's signed the likes of Jan Oblak. And they've also shown recently that they can regenerate, right? They spent 180 million last summer. Julian Alvarez came in, a player that I really wanted us to go for. Conor Gallagher, Robin Lenormand, Alexander Sorloth, and Atletico are just a point behind the big two again. So, yeah, it's gone really, really well for him there. There's no doubt about that. Another name is Roberto Olabe, currently at Real Sociedad, but going to step down from his role in the summer. He's already informed the club of that. Real Sociedad collected their first major trophy for more than 30 years, lifting the Copa del Rey in 2021 with him there. They've also become regular top 6 finishers in the league, and he's been acclaimed for recruiting and trading top talents like Merino, Isak, Odegaard, Silva. He had provided Real Sociedad with assurances that he'd be fully focused on the job until the end of the season. So maybe reticent to at least publicly commit to a new role until then, which is interesting, isn't it? Because does that mean, and I'm just speculating here, I'm just trying to read between the lines and sort of take on board that particular piece of information, but does it mean that if we're going to make that appointment this month, Roberto Olabe won't be that guy? Because if he's waiting till the end of the season, that isn't really going to fit. And I'll tell you why that's not going to fit. Because when you think about the mood among the fans right now, when you think about the feeling towards the football club, towards whoever is, in the sporting director role at the minute, it's obviously Jason Ayto on an interim basis. I don't think the club can allow this to rumble on until the summer. They might get the deal done. They might already have the deal done. They might already have it wrapped up. But I think they would do well to publicize and to announce, because Arsenal fans want to know that this project that we've been sold for a number of years, that has had, I think, glowing reviews for a while now and has worked in terms of getting Arsenal back to a level where they can compete. People fear that this project is about to fall apart. Lose the sporting director in Edu, who was obviously a massive part of that, have a couple of really underwhelming transfer windows. People are going to start to wonder if this project is about to go bang, and not in the good way, in the bad way. So I think Arsenal, if they can wrap up this appointment next month, should reveal who it is and make an announcement as soon as feasibly possible, because it will relieve some of the pressure off of them as a football club. I think it gives whoever's coming into the role the opportunity to start working on the summer window without having to do it just in the shadows as well. So that's another benefit to it. But yeah, I think they need to get on with it. I really, really do. And does the fact that Olabe doesn't want to commit to anything before he leaves La Real, does that say anything about how high up the list he is, or how close he is to getting the job? Don't know. Speculating, but it's an interesting thought. Another name that's been mentioned is Thiago Scuro, Monaco CEO. He's a Brazilian, just like Edu. He's been at the French club since July 2023 when he replaced Paul Mitchell. His role was upgraded to CEO after just 3 months, and he has been in control of the sporting and business side of the club since last season. Monaco finished second for the first. Sorry, he's been in control of the sporting and business side of the club since. So that goes back to if it was July that he was appointed, August, September, October 2023 is when he took that sort of upgraded role. He's pursued a strategy of bringing the average age of the team down, and stated his ambition is for half the team to be comprised of academy graduates. He built his career as part of Red Bull's multi-club group and enjoyed success ahead of their Brazilian outpost, as Bragantino went from a second division side to finalists in the 2021 Copa Sudamericana. He's obviously working at Monaco, that are part of the wider ownership stable alongside Cercle Bruges. And given Arteta has hinted at Arsenal entering the multi-club space in the future, this is what Jordan Campbell in The Athletic has written. Scuro would bring experience in with regards to how to connect the dots. Speaks Portuguese, English, Spanish, Italian, and French. And his role as a chief executive means he can straddle both the footballing and business side. So he sounds like someone you'd go for if you were trying to go down the kind of multi-club route. And you know what worries me a little bit? Like, so again, I'm not sitting here trying to discredit Thiago Scuro, because I don't know enough about him to be able to do that, okay? I don't know enough about him. It would be wrong and unfair of me to do that. But when I read that sort of breakdown of his career, and it's fantastic from Jordan Campbell, written over on The Athletic, I think to myself, he might be the one that appeals most to KSE, because if he can help them in terms of progressing with a sort of wider strategy, a strategy that is bigger than just the football, that means going down the multi-club route, they might see that as a benefit. If he is sort of someone who's very adamant that you need to bring through youth and has an ambition of having half of the team being academy graduates, again, that feels like it's in keeping with what KSE would prefer to have us be. Make stars, don't buy them, all of that jazz. The problem is that in the Premier League, you can't do that. It doesn't work. The league is too strong for you to be able to do that. I think in France, you can get away with it. And I think, we often see young French players coming through and moving on. And that's because it's a hotbed of talent. And the league is a good standard, but it's not the standard of the Premier League. And so you can kind of get away with adopting that strategy, and actually it can be quite fruitful for you as a Ligue 1 club if you're going to bring these players through, give them their opportunities, and then sell to the likes of the Premier League or La Liga or Serie A, etc., right? So this all sounds great on paper and in theory, but while this would feel like a good fit for KSE, this is probably the least appealing of the options to me based on his history so far. What I thought was really, really interesting when sort of reading this report is that there's no mention of Thomas Rosicky. Now, there was some chat, wasn't there, that Thomas Rosicky was in contention, that he was someone that Arsenal were looking at. Obviously, he's said to have done some really good things at Sparta Prague over in his native Czech Republic. But he's not mentioned on this list, which is interesting to me. It seems based on what David Ornstein's information is, and David Ornstein is normally pretty on the money, that he's not among the final sort of 5 candidates. So, right, where would I go? What route would I go down if I were the Arsenal hierarchy right now? I'm going to rank them in terms of who I'd like to see. So we'll start from the bottom. So number 5 for me is Thiago Scuro. Number 4 is, you're going to be surprised by this, Jason Ayto. Because I think, well, I said you're going to be surprised by it. Do you know what? Let me go again. Let me do this from the beginning, because trying to do it backwards, I've ended up confusing myself, which is terrible. Anyway, let's start again. Right. So I'm going to rank them in reverse order, right? So number 5 is the person I least want to have the job, and number 1 would be my preferred candidate. So number 5, Jason Ayto. I've already touched on it. I think he'd be starting from a disadvantage. I think he'd be starting from a position of huge pressure. Some would counter that point and say, yeah, but the fact that he's already at the club, that he's been working at the club for such a long time, what that would do is mean that he doesn't need that settling in and embedding period. That's what the counter argument is. To me, I think it works the other way around. I think the pressure he'd be under from the very beginning makes his job harder. So Jason Ayto's at number 5 for me. Number 4 is Thiago Scuro. I think he would be a great candidate in the eyes of the ownership. And I know ultimately that's what matters. But from a purely footballing standpoint, this is not the guy I want. He feels like a hybrid between a football guy and a business guy. And I would rather the business was done by others, and that he moves aside so that we can bring someone in who's got a higher and a greater focus, if you like, on the sporting side of things, rather than someone who dabbles in the business side as well. Because I always think if you spread yourself too thin, you end up doing nothing to the best of your ability. Okay, moving on. I'm gonna go. In. This is tough. In third, I'm gonna go Roberto Olabe. That's gonna surprise people. I'll explain a little bit about why in a minute. But I look at Roberto Olabe and I look at his history and I look at his track record. And yes, he's unearthed some gems. And yes, he's been responsible for negotiating deals involving some fantastic players, whether those are incomings, outgoings, or both in the cases of some players that he's managed to bring in, they've managed to flip and move them on. Right. So Roberto Olabe, for me, is in third place because I don't think that having that job at a club like Real Sociedad is anything like having that job at a club like Arsenal, where there is a demand to win now, where you're not going to be lauded, at least not by the supporters, for flipping players for big money. Right? There is an expectation that Arsenal are going to go on and win major silverware. And that means you need to get big players and you need to get them in now. Yes, you want to have some building going on in the background so that you can maintain a healthy level of development within your squad. Of course you do. But Roberto Olabe feels like someone who would who would thrive at a club and has thrived at a club where the expectation level is just a little bit lower, and where it's about making the best of what you have rather than it being about having that X factor, right, that I think you need to be able to attract the biggest players in the world. And where I really sort of sided with Edu was that I thought that he had that personality and that character that meant that he could go in a room with anyone and he could convince them that the project was the right one for them. I think Clive Palmer said to me on Thursday last week or something like that. He said, you'd buy a used car from Edu. That's how good of a salesman he feels like. I don't know if Roberto Olabe is that kind of guy. I don't know if he's that kind of guy. So I've got to assume, or I've got to judge this based on what I know right now. And I don't know him to be that sort of character that lights up a room, that guy that could sell you a used car. He looks like a good talent identifier, but the sporting director role at Arsenal is so much more than that. And the role at Sociedad is about bringing in players, getting the team to a certain point, but without there ever really being that expectation of going much higher and really sort of knocking on the door. Like, you could not compare the objectives of Roberto Olabe at Real Sociedad as those of Andrea Berta, who's been, for instance, at Atletico Madrid. The levels are different. And Olabe, I know you need to give people a chance so that they can jump up and can prove themselves. But I think having lost Edu, who was such a key component in this project, I think we need to go with a sure thing now. So Olabe's in third for me. Second, this will surprise people, I'm going Dan Ashworth. I don't think what happened at Manchester United was in any way a reflection of Dan Ashworth and his value as a sporting director. I really don't. I think he's very, very astute. I think he's proven that over time. I think he's shown that he can do big deals. And this is another thing, right? You're going to call me crazy and you're going to start moaning and calling me a conspiracy theorist and all the rest of it. But Dan Ashworth, right? Let's have a look at his career now. So I'm just bringing it up in front of me because I want to make sure that I'm getting my facts right as I kind of reel this off to you. Right. So Dan Ashworth, he has spent time, first of all, sorry, I'm just reading this. Let me just make sure I've got the right thing. There we go. So he retired as a player and he became academy director at Peterborough. Then he went on to become Centre of Excellence director at Cambridge United. Then he moved to West Brom. And then after that, September 2012, this is the key bit, Ashworth was appointed as the FA Director of Elite Development. He's one of the creators of the England DNA and Elite Player Development Plan, which aims to help create winning senior teams in the men and women's games. Of course, later on, he ended up joining Brighton and Hove Albion. That was in the spring of 2019. And in February 2022, it was confirmed that he'd agreed to join Premier League club Newcastle United before, of course, he went to Manchester United and all of that stuff happened, right? But the reason I've gone with Dan Ashworth is because, or part of the reason is because, A, one of the most experienced people in this country. I think it's important that Arsenal have someone who can improve relations with the FA. I think it's really important. Now, you're going to think that I'm reaching here and you're going to say that I'm talking out of my backside, and maybe I am, but this is just what I think. So humor me, bear with me. Throughout most of this season, we've been complaining about bad decisions, about our people getting charged, about our people being refereed differently, treated differently. And there is a feeling from sort of within the Arsenal fan base that we are being picked on. And I wonder if there's a way that by appointing the right person, someone who already has that pre-existing relationship with the FA, I'm not saying that we're going to get any favors. I'm not saying that we should be asking for favors, but would that help? Would that help in terms of ensuring that we are refereed the same as everyone else, that we're charged the same as everyone else? Because it feels like we get charged for bloody everything. Everybody else seems to get away with stuff. And funny how charges involving other managers seem to take far longer, even when the manager holds his hands up and says, yes, I was wrong. So it's not the only reason I'd appoint Dan Ashworth. I think Dan Ashworth's got a really good body of work prior to a very short stint at Manchester United, which, as I say, I don't really think is down to him. Dan Ashworth for me seems like a sound candidate. And it's a bit like the kind of Kai Havertz thing, right? Where you look at where he's been, you look at, the time that he spent at sort of Manchester United, albeit a very short period of time, for which I don't hold him responsible for the failure of. And you can all of a sudden go, well, this guy's useless, and dismiss him because of that, when actually you need to look beyond that. You need to scratch beneath the surface, and then you'll see that actually, discount the Man United bit for a second, he's had a very, very good career. And he's someone who I think, could do a good job at Arsenal, understands the big club thing. He's been at a couple of them now. Obviously understands the Premier League and the dynamics of it, because he's got experience of being a sporting director at 1, 2, 3 Premier League clubs. I think there's a lot of positives to Dan Ashworth, but I think because of what happened at United, his name might sound a little bit kind of tarnished, if you like, and I don't think that's fair. So he's my second choice. So far, Ayto is down in 5th for me. In 4th, it's Thiago Scuro. In 3rd, it's Olabe. In 2nd, it's Dan Ashworth, which means that my number 1 is Andrea Berta. He's the one, looking at this list, that I would pick. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that for the last year, I've been banging the drum and saying, we need to go and get Andrea Berta from Atletico Madrid. No. I'm not going to pretend that. He's been at the club for 12 months, and he only left last month. Okay, so this was not a name that was in my mind. This is not a name that I've been sort of peddling for a while. I looked at this list from David Ornstein today. I went through the names. I looked into them a little bit before coming live on here. And the one that jumped out to me was Andrea Berta. Perfect balance between understanding what it takes to keep a club competitive with other clubs who have greater spending power. So Atletico have punched above their weight and have competed with Barcelona and Real Madrid, which they have no right to do. The club has developed over time, new stadium, increased revenues, etc., etc. And obviously that has helped, but that has come as a result of them being very, very good on the pitch. And Andrea Berta has played a big part in that. Okay, so he's got experience of bridging the gap between the clubs that are better resourced and the clubs that are sort of just below that, which I think is kind of where we fall and where we sit. Because whatever you say about our ownership, self-sustaining is what they want. There are a lot of regulations in place. And so we haven't got a blank checkbook that we can just throw about in the way that Manchester City have done, for instance, for the last decade, or in the way that Chelsea did for the best part of 2 decades under Roman Abramovich. So Berta has that experience of sort of bridging the gap between the strong spenders and the biggest of spenders. That's the first thing. Second of all, he's managed to broker really good deals involving big name players, which is the place that we want to be in, right? We don't want to be doing deals for second-rate players. We want to be doing deals for the very best players. They have managed to get players in at Atletico Madrid that I would have argued prior to signing for Atletico Madrid had their pick of clubs, but they chose them. He must have played a part in that. I'm sure Diego Simeone does too. I think there are a lot of similarities between Diego Simeone and Mikel Arteta, not in terms of their success as a coach so far, because I know that's what the critics are going to tell me in the comments. Simeone's up here, Arteta's not there yet. That's the truth of it. But in the sense of knows what he wants, very strong character, kind of needs to have quite a bit of power to be able to do his job in the right way, or to the best of his ability, etc., etc. I just think there's so many similarities between our situation and the situation that Atletico have been in for such a long time. And so I think the one that would slot in nicely is Andrea Berta. And I'm just sort of looking at, his history. As I say, joined them in 2013, went on to become a sporting director, 53 years old. And when I look at some of the signings he's made, I really like him. I really like him. So again, this is not coming from a position of amazing knowledge or super in-depth research. It's just through literally reading sort of their bios and CVs online, if you like. But that's the kind of order in which I would rank those 5 sporting directors in terms of my personal preference. Now, for what it's worth, I think that Jason Ayto is probably much higher up the list than I've got him. And I think Roberto Olabe is probably higher than 3rd. But for me, it goes like this. In 5th place, in terms of my preference, Jason Ayto. In 4th, Thiago Scuro. In 3rd, Roberto Olabe. In 2nd, Dan Ashworth. And top of my list is Andrea Berta, the former Atletico Madrid sporting director. So yeah, that's what I've gone with. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I'd love to hear from you. Just a quick reminder as well, if you haven't done so already, please leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. Subscribe to the channel as well if you're new. All of that amazing stuff really, really does help. I'm going to leave it there because I'm shattered. The late night coming back from Nottingham has caught up with me, and we're recording this on Thursday night. If you're a podcast listener, it'll be in your feed bright and early on Friday morning, but we're recording this on Thursday night. And so it is time for me to go and put my feet up, to kick back, to chill, and to disconnect a little bit, because I think sometimes we need to do that. What I'd love you to do is get into the comment section and let me know your 5 in terms of the rankings and how you would rank them in terms of your preference. I'd love to hear from you. So please get involved in the comments. Remember, leave a like on the video if you haven't done so already. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. And if you're listening on audio, leave us a review. You know the drill by now. I will see you all very, very soon. Until the next one, take care of yourselves and have a great evening. Goodbye.